Science fiction exists outside of the North. The tradition of British and North American literature and cinema. It exists in South America or Latin America. Pablo Capana is one of the pioneers from Argentina. He said Latin American SF is a genre, a science fiction that resists recognizing itself as such. So it is science fiction, but it does not recognize itself as science fiction. Some of them are simply commercial. There is this idea that if you categorize yourself as a science fiction writer, then your audience, your readers would be reduced. You are appealing to a narrower segment of the population that reads literature or watches film. There are political reasons. Some of them could be related to, a view that if you write science fiction, you are the subject of an imposed genre. And there are also the aesthetic reasons, this idea that science fiction is a popular genre, and as such, it's a lower form of literature. And there is that idea then that if you write science fiction, you cannot be a serious author. You are at the margins. There is a bit of that, a disavowal, a denial. If what I'm doing is science fiction, I better not be too open about it. Let's not underline that. The science fiction produced in Latin America has been ignored. It tends to be ignored for a number of reasons. First of all, expectations. We don't associate science and technology with Latin America. Indeed, the stereotype is that Latin America is this primitive, backward region that does not produce scientific research, does not produce technology, but there is this idea that science fiction does not fit Latin America as, for example, a genre like the realismo mágico. We have all this focus on the exotic elements. There are the roots. Film, science fiction cinema has not emerged out of nowhere, okay? It emerges out of a literary tradition, which in Argentina is a very, very strong literary tradition. There's a lot of writers in Argentina that have written works that can be described as science fictional. El viaje maravilloso del señor Nick Nat, about somebody who manages to travel to Mars. And the book was published in 1875, and the author is Eduardo Holmberg, who was a scientist. It's an exotic text. There is this deep root of science fiction cultural production in Argentina, which is related also to a highbrow or canonical take on literature. The most notable examples would be Jorge Luis Borges and Adolfo Bioy Casares. We can say they are science fiction if we understand this in a loose way, okay? Science fiction, a soft science fiction. In the Invención de Morel, for example, which is a novel from 1940, we have an inventor, Morel, who's invented some kind of holographic 3D recording, okay? So 3D cinema, okay? That is projected, and you have, human beings in 3 dimensions, size ratio 1:1, so that if you see those images, you don't know if they are recorded or if they are real. But apart from that, mostly it avoids this kind of technological imagination, the science fiction, and it's focused on speculation. There's a strong tradition of science fiction also in graphic novels like El Eternauta, and then there are more contemporary ones, like these ones by Diego Agrimbau. I insist then soft science fiction, speculative science fiction. So here we may have to forget about Zubin. You also know that genres fluctuate, that genres are not solid categories. So from this basis of science fiction production in literature and in graphic novel, we finally arrive at science fiction film produced in Argentina. As I said, I'm going to try to compare these works with films that have been produced elsewhere, because there's always a dialogue. We know that science fiction emerged in English literature, science fiction cinema in Argentina emerges out of this tradition, combining the elements of a genre which has been produced elsewhere in Europe, in the US, with some more local elements, even if sometimes that's in the negative sense. For example, lack of a film industry, lack of financial resources to produce film, that conditioned of Latin American cinematic production in Argentina. But with cinema, there are some examples from the 30s, from the 40s, but I would say that the most important science fiction film is this one, Invasion. And in the history of cinema, it was made rather late, because in a way I am saying that there is not many interesting works of science fiction cinema made in Argentina until this one. The film is from 1969, and also it's based on a story by Borges and Bioy Casares. By the way, if you've said this to Borges, he would probably said, no, I'm not saying that he was a science fiction writer, but some of his stories can certainly be classified as science fiction. This is a film that is set in a fictional Buenos Aires called Aquilea, and the city is on the verge of a foreign invasion. It's not an alien invasion. There's no creatures. If we go back to the definition by Darko Subin, in which he sees science fiction as a combination, you will remember, of estrangement and cognition. The estrangement part, the fantastical part, the non-realistic part in this film is very subtle. We have foreign invasion, apparently foreign, because the invaders speak Argentinian Spanish. But anyway, they are planning an invasion of the city, and there's a group of people who are resisting that invasion. Who are the invaders? We don't know. What do they want exactly? We don't know, but probably take over the city, gain political and or economic and or cultural control of that city. There's nothing science fictional about the film if we focus on the visual dimension. So I mean, no technological element that does not exist at the time in which the film is made. The film takes place in a city that is not Buenos Aires, but everybody knows it's Buenos Aires. I will compare this to other films. For example, Alphaville by Jean-Luc Godard. This group of people just goes about their lives, and when they get information that this group of invaders is trying to join the city, just go there and try to repel them through violence, okay? They have guns, but none of them is an expert soldier or anything. They are ordinary people engaged in a task of armed struggle against the invaders. They are outnumbered, they are not particularly supported or funded by the government of the city. Everybody seems to ignore that this invasion is going on. Everybody goes about their business. Everybody is ignorant of this. But apparently for this group of people, it's important to prevent this invasion. So globally, can we connect this film to other SF works? I don't know if you're familiar with this film, with Alphaville, a French film, which also is supposed to set in a futuristic or alternative world. Alphaville, it's a world, but it just looks like Paris in the 1965. Of course, it's a film from Godard, so it has its own intricacies in terms of plot. But look at the similarities between, for example, Lemmy Caution, the detective who is the star in Alphaville, and Herrera, who is the protagonist of Invasion. The photography, the high contrast lighting. The director of Invasion worked in France, by the way. He's an Argentinian director, but he had moved to France and worked as an assistant director to Robert Bresson. I want to insist on a version of science fiction that is speculative. We don't have much in terms of spectacle here. We don't have much in terms of sophisticated technology that informs so many plots of science fiction cinema. It's a more intellectual version of science fiction, softer, if you want to use that distinction between soft and hard science fiction, there's nothing really about science in this film. It's more about conveying this idea of an alternative reality, a novum, and something that estranged. It's not realistic, but it's still cognitive, cognition in the sense of logic. We don't have any spirits. We don't have anything that could be ascribed to magical realism. It's a film de vanguardia, aesthetically and politically. The plot is linear, but nothing much happens in the film, apart from these scenes in which the protagonists are fighting the invaders. But nothing seems to change much. Eventually, they are defeated and everybody is killed. But the film finishes with a new, the invasion is completed. These foreigners, strangers, or whatever they are, enter the city. Apparently, they take over things, and an underground resistance is formed. But the difference is that this resistance is made up completely of younger people who are in their 20s. The Argentinian critic Gonzalo Aguilar speaks of this film in an essay titled La Salvación por la Violencia. There is this idea that violence is the answer to solving the problems. And of course, 1969, it was a year of youth movements, of unrest. You have all the riots and the violence of El Mayo Francés. So May 1968 in France, but you also have similar movements in the Czech Republic and in Argentina, in Mexico, Tlatelolco in 1968. In Argentina, you had El Cordobazo, student riots in 1969, etc. So this idea of armed struggle and clandestine operations that were going to be made against those in power, it's very present. Prospectively, you could say that it predicted the violence that would characterize Argentina in the 70s, and also the resistance, the terrorist resistance to the dictatorship by the group Montoneros. Here we have Herrera captured by the invaders. The only way we can distinguish the heroes from the villains is that the heroes wear a dark suit and the bad guys, the invaders, light-colored suit. This looks out of date for us, but it would have been very modern in the 1969 in Argentina. This set of 3 televisions, 3 TV sets all together. We have telephones. We have a typewriter here on the margin of the frame. All of these points towards the maybe technological superiority of the invaders, the bad guys. This film can be connected to a film from Brazil, O Quinto Poder. In this film, it's very clear that the place where the invasion happens is Brazil. It's Rio, and it's also very clear that the invaders are foreigners, that they speak English or they speak German, whereas in Invasión, they all speak Spanish with an Argentinian accent. And the city is Buenos Aires, thinly veiled, but it's not supposed to be Buenos Aires in the films. But you will see how it shares an emphasis on communications. The main aim of the invaders is to hack the media, and that's the way they will manage to subject the population. O Quinto Poder, it's more science fictional in the sense that they have a technology that will disrupt human conscience. I think they are both informed by similar ideas about the invasion. Again, it's the 60s. It's the time of the Cuban Revolution in Latin America, of these divided world or world visions. Yes. These are stills from the film, from Invasión, but this is the ending. This is the youth resistance forming up, training in clandestine camps. So this is clearly an allusion. I'm tempted to say a prediction of what was going to happen in Argentina with left-wing groups that literally engaged in what was called lucha armada. So let's jump ahead this film, La Sonámbula, because here we are in the terrain of a more obvious work of science fiction. The film is set in the year 2010, which times go by very fast. That was 10 years ago, but the film was made in 1998. So 2010 was the future at the time in which the film was made. We have once more the element of canonical, of highbrow literature through the screenwriter Ricardo Piglia. Piglia is one of the most prestigious writers in Argentina. He's from a different generation than Borges and Bioy Casares. We are in the terrain of a science fiction film that portrays a future society. And also we are into another terrain that is very, very connected with the science fiction imagination, and in particular with science fiction as a film genre. You have it in literature, but it's much closer in cinema, which is dystopia. And this film is set in Argentina, 12 years into the future. The coordinates, geographical, spatial, are very clear. Now they are about. It's not a fictional city. It is a Buenos Aires living under a totalitarian government. In this world, there's also has been an accident in a factory that caused the release of toxic gases, and people who were exposed, they've lost their memories. You have it in a wide range of science fiction films. Blade Runner, perhaps one of the most important. We could spend 10 minutes coming up with examples. The other premise is the dystopian futuristic society in which people live in a dictatorship. The main character, Eva, who's lost her memories, she's not going to be killed or anything, but the way in which she's detained and taken to a center mirrors a practice that was very extended in Argentina in the 70s, in the dictatorship, which is clandestine, undercover police forces or the army kidnapping people on the streets. In some cases, they could have been militants. In other cases, they were just people who expressed an opinion against the government. So the film is mirroring this. In a way, it's saying that this that happened in Argentina in the 70s was going to happen again in 2010. This happened in the 90s, a period of neoliberal reforms, a period in which the responsible for the dictatorships, the military junta, who had ruled Argentina between 76 and 1983, responsible for the murder of 30,000 people, had been pardoned. They had been convicted after the dictatorship ended in the 80s, and then in the 90s, the president issued a pardon, un indulto. So here we see a concern about history repeating itself, a very clear concern that could happen. We have this play with the issue of memory, okay? We have these highways, again, that completely change the image of Buenos Aires. It's a dystopian Buenos Aires. You can trace this back to Metropolis. You could trace it to a number of highways. These actually exist that were built during the military dictatorship. This was a major urban redesign, but it involved destroying buildings. So there is an issue of ignoring history. When you destroy a historic building, you're kind of wiping out history. During the dictatorship, the government planned to build 8 highway networks crisscrossing Buenos Aires. Eventually, only 2 were built, and then the regime ended. But perhaps this is what Buenos Aires would look like if they had continued. The people who were the victims of the dictatorship are referenced in the film, those who lost their memories. They are referred through an euphemism, un eufemismo, afectados. They've been affected, they don't have any memories, and they put them in a place which is almost a prison. Let me jump ahead to a final film, the film that is out of the norm. Here we have very low budget film, but takes place, it's set in outer space. It's called Adiós, Querida Luna. So the film is about a mission that Argentina launches to destroy the moon. well, the film is set in the year, I can't remember exactly, but it's 2050 or something. So it's far into the future. And the world is almost destroyed through the effects of climate change. And there is an Argentinian scientist who comes up with the idea, the theory, the cause, the reason for the climate being what it is, a disaster. It's not global warming, pollution, it's the gravitational pull of the moon. Nobody believes in it in the international community except for the Argentinian government. So that was what does the national government do? They send a mission to destroy the moon because they realize that if Argentina is finally successful and the country manages to resolve the problems that have arisen out of climate change, then Argentina would be, a hero in the world order. About films being more focused on speculation, the moon is not destroyed, astronauts are visited by an alien in human form. He looks like a tango singer. Here you have the Virgen de Luján in the spaceship. So the film is playing humorously with the conventions of the space adventure, not quite a space opera, but certainly space adventure film, and the conventions of local Argentinian icons. It goes as far as showing the astronauts when they want to they need recreation. They start playing games. In 2001, you have them playing chess. In Star Wars, they play this kind of holographic game. In this film, they play with a sort of holographic video game of Maradona, so some kind of holographic football. The driving force behind these missions is a sense of inequality and an equal distribution of power in the world. But at the same time, there is this desire of Argentina to show the world, we can do it. We can save the planet through technology. But of course, it doesn't work. The film is like a science fiction comedy, okay? It doesn't take itself too seriously at the same time. But it ends with the international community finding out that Argentina has sent this mission. So the local government denies it and they destroy the ship. So you have again the idea of wiping out history and wiping out the people who are inconvenient for the government. The references to Maradona are inscribed within this tension between the national and the international. Yes, Maradona is a symbol of Argentina standing up to the world, particularly through two goals that Maradona scored against England in the 1986 World Cup, which is a revenge against the English, especially in the aftermath of the Guerra de Malvinas, the Falklands War. But it's also, again, Argentina imposing itself metaphorically, of course, symbolically, because this is football. This is not a war. This is not the international stage. This is not Argentina solving climate change. But at least it's a symbol.